Exciting time in the world right now.
This video covers something more personal to me than most pieces of art have. I cannot deny that. There is a level of bias here that is indistinguishable, and you must take that into account. The truth is, I've tried to make this over and over, but I cannot quite put into words how good this show is, or why you, the viewer, should watch it. This is why I've had such difficulty making such a video. The themes covered within the show, specifically regarding fatherhood, which happens to be the emotional core of much of Mr. Robot, aligns much with my personal experience and connections. However, I don't think I need to talk about that in much more detail, because the point is I don't think my bias matters. This show, using the famous IGN phrase, has something for everyone. It just does. The amount of interesting themes that Mr. Robot contains will provide intrigue to you in some format, I can promise you that. The actual plot of the show, which I can't really get into, this is a video for Mr. Robot newcomers after all, is so complex and yet not at all pretentious. It manages to evoke emotions that shows like Breaking Bad would give, whilst also providing an existential outlook on life through the effects of others that BoJack Horseman gives. It manages to do so much in just 45 episodes and a YouTube sequence. The pilot, which is where I can put most of my plot focus into due to the lack of spoilers, is renowned for being one of the best pilots in any show ever. But from my experience of talking to people about the show, they kind of switch off within 3 or 4 episodes. I think Mr. Robot's biggest strength is also its biggest weakness in this regard. It doesn't play all its cards straight away. In fact, the main premise of the show isn't truly introduced until right at the end of Series 1. Whilst this can be extremely exciting for viewers that stick to the show, it leads to many switching off before the show gets as interesting as it does. There is no denying that elements of Mr. Robot won't be for everyone, but I think there's something, small or big, that will always captivate an audience, including you. It's magnificent in scale, intimate, nerve-wracking, slow, fast, both at the same time. Of course, I want to talk about the show in more detail, while still remaining as ambiguous as possible, because this programme in particular has so many spoilers and interesting moments that need to be experienced rather than told. Oh, by the way, if you have emetophobia, or the fear of vomit, I advise you not to watch this show. Otherwise, let's continue. Sam Esmail, the writer and director for the majority of the show, somehow manages to tell an interesting sci-fi, horror, comedy, crime drama about a world so tired of its current society that it rips itself slowly to shreds. Sound familiar? As someone who watched the show myself during the March lockdown of 2020, I found myself surrounded by a world I saw reflected in reality, with elements of both pessimism and optimism sprinkled in to make it more interesting than that depressing reality I lived in. E-Corp is like if Disney, Apple, Amazon, the Daily Mail, and let's say Hitler had a baby and tortured it until it became a malevolent bastion of corporate cynicism. It basically influences the economy and all its citizens to rule a capitalist regime set within New York. This setting of claustrophobic, industrial, and financial skyscrapers constantly looming over all of the characters. These larger stakes make the show interesting from a dystopian standpoint, but all of the intrigue mostly comes, at least for me, from the deeper human moments from Elliot. Elliot Alderson, played by Rami Malek, is why this show didn't fade into obscurity, in the eyes of the mainstream audience at least. If you only really care about actors, yes, he is good. He's great even. If you just want good Rami Malek material, you've got plenty of it here. I haven't seen him in anything else, at least live action wise, but he's an exceptional actor who manages to be both frightening and empathetic at the same time. That duality that is constantly woven through the show is encapsulated in his performance. The great stuff about this character isn't all on the actor though. Esmail is great at writing interesting and cringeless plots surrounding mental illness. Those interested in shows exploring less Hollywoodized depictions of mental illness get something out of where this character goes. There are elements of that blockbuster-esque use of mental illness, although even those are used brilliantly as a whole. It's just used very well, excellently even. Again, I'm trying not to say too much. This character is a constant enigma in the show, as is most people, but everything it does with his character is worth looking at in itself. The theme of control and constantly trying to find yourself in a world that doesn't care about you is used to strong effect within Elliot. If any of that appeals to you, that's another reason to give it a try.
Alexa, do you love me?
That's not the kind of thing I am capable of.
Every main character is brilliant. You have the comically evil and hilariously charismatic villains like Philip Price. You have the corny, edgy Darlene, who at first seems a bit over the top.
Dickhead.
She just called me a dickhead.
But she manages to provide some of the most emotional moments in the show due to her relationship with other characters and her own mental addictions and problems. Some characters, like CIA agent Dom DePuro, are introduced a lot later, but still manage to be incredibly touching due to the fact we see their human, emotional and private moments. The show isn't always It manages to also be slow and steady when it needs to be. Then it manages to hit you with
Welcome to your life. There's no turning back.
Grab her phone.
Even while we
Got it.
sleep.
And so on and so forth.
yeah. There are many characters like this in the show, some more important than others. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much, you see. I just want to provide examples of how the show creates a rich roster of real, emotional, and sometimes comical characters. Joey Badass's character in particular shines for being hilarious.
And the studio. Damn. That's no way to treat a caddy.
I've intentionally left out some prominent characters. I'll leave you to check them out yourself. The filmmaking is often not on most people's radar when choosing to watch a show, but it's a very subtle and important aspect of any piece of media. It's just as important as anything else in a TV programme. It manages to tell the story in less obvious ways, providing more emotional reactions than a lot of the written storytelling. I mean, what can you get out of this scene? Look at the lighting, the cinematography, the set design, the costume, how close the camera is to Elliot's face. Without it, would we feel what he's feeling in the way we do? The show being right in the middle of our new golden age of TV creates a cinematic world with high moving stakes. I've been playing many clips throughout this video. I could talk about how Sam Esmail creates a style from his directing for ages, but I don't want to bog this video down with even more information than it already has. You can get an opinion of the directing yourself from the show and the clips I've used. Alternatively, Ralph the Movie Maker created a brilliant set of videos on Mr. Robot, which are a tad more spoilery, but do a way better job at talking about the technicalities. I recommend you watch that if you're still undecided on whether to watch the show itself. The score and soundtrack have both been used within this video as well in the background. It's probably one of the best things about the show, and if you haven't noticed it so far, you should scroll back and give it a listen, or check out some of the soundtrack on YouTube. It contributes much to the overall tone of the show, and is another noteworthy aspect to talk about. See, the truth is, I could go on about so many aspects of Mr. Robot for ages. Another version of this video did, but I think it's important to leave you with just enough information to be able to form your own judgment and check it out. Another block in the road for many in regards to watching the show is access to it. I was lucky enough to have a limited access to the first 2 seasons, and by then I was so interested that I bought the DVD and finished it off. It's on Amazon Prime for free with membership, or at least it should be when this video is up. Alternatively, if you don't want to do that, I could bring up the question of piracy. Morally, I have no issue with piracy if I'm intrigued enough by the show to buy it afterwards. If the quality is good, I will always buy a copy. I recommend that if you decide to go this route and like the show, please buy the DVD. You can get it surprisingly cheap for the amount of quality content you get. I hope this video has sufficed in talking about the show and convincing you of its impeccable quality without going into too much detail about the narrative or characters. This video has been incredibly difficult to make, as I've had to deal with my own personal bias to the relatable aspects that have impacted my life. Dealing with how to put that into words and to the extent to which I should link my personal experiences with the show was difficult to work out. I hope I've made the right choice. As for you, the viewer, I really do hope you check it out. Art is always subjective, but I think the quality of this show is so universal and yet so unappreciated that it deserves a greater following. If I can contribute to that, even with one person, I will be happier as a result of it. I urge you to watch the first season at least. It's only 10 episodes long and tells you what the show will basically be like for the remainder of its runtime, although it still manages to be unpredictable throughout. If the first season doesn't interest you at all, after watching all of it, you might do yourself a disservice if you continue, but I guarantee you that will not happen. Mr. Robot manages to tell a story about trust, loneliness, about creating a world where you matter in a reality where you simply don't. It's about the evils of a capitalist overlord and also the evils of those who wish to destroy capitalism for their own purposes. It's about the personal connections you get from family and friends who give a shit about you when everyone else does not. Those personal reactions and the cause and effect relationship that every human has in this world. Mr. Robot is reality. And yet, it uses its fictional narrative to be more than reality. That is to me, Mr. Robot. I hope it will be different to you, but no less riveting.
Hello, Evil Corp. We are F Society.
You're here because you sense something wrong with the world. Something you can't explain.
We're constantly told by our leaders, our scientists, our religions, that our world is crumbling and that we are the problem.
You should know that nothing's gonna come from this. We were doing just fine.
This is a nightmare.
You are!
So are you.
I wish you were dead!
So do I! I think I'm pretty fucking far from okay. Should my revolution just bury our minds instead of freeing them?
We will not stop until every tentacle of your evil monstrosity is sliced off at the nerve.
You know that bullshit people say about how when you fall, you gotta get up? The whole thing is a fall.
It's not about the money. About the principle.
This is exactly what you do when shit like this happens. You shut down.
Hello, friend.